Morning, church. Hey, it's good to see you. Hey, before we jump into the series a little bit, last week we talked about this storm idea, and sometimes I want to tell a story about how this was illustrated. Last week we talked about this idea that our storm has a name, but our storm bows at a name. That was our main idea of last week, talking about when Jesus calmed the storm when the disciples were freaking out. And this past week, we got to see that played out. If you're on the church email list, then you maybe got a few updates, but I want to tell kind of the whole story. So last Sunday night, our phone rings, Emily's phone rings at 12:30 at night, which is not normally a good sign. She picks it up. And a lot of you know Rocky Christensen. He's the quiet guy around here. He preached for me a couple weeks ago. Anyway, it was Rocky's wife, Emily. Emily's dad, who is the most athletic, fit, older gentleman that I know in my life. I feel like he can just run up and down mountains. That's Chuck. But anyway, she called and she's frantic because Chuck had a heart attack. He went for a run, never came home. They called, they filed a report. All of a sudden they get word that he is being brought to a hospital. They were up in Canada, and he's being brought to the hospital in Vancouver, which is about an hour away from where they're at, in critical condition. Hey, trying to shorten the story, on Sunday night, this all happens, this past week. Okay, Chuck, athletic, on vacation with Rocky and Emily. They're up there together, and Emily's mom, Sunday night, has a heart attack. Found out it's cardiac arrest, goes into cardiac arrest Sunday night. Okay, from then, they didn't know how long his body was on this trail before someone found him and started doing CPR. So they cooled his body to try to protect brain activity. That was Monday morning. It was a waiting game. No one knew anything at all, any bit of condition, didn't know how long he was there. So Sunday night goes into cardiac arrest. We found out later the person that found him had to do CPR for 24 minutes until help got there. Okay? The storm has a name. Okay? That happens Sunday night. Okay? Emily lets us know. We send out message. Other people that they're friends with, they start praying. We start praying. Storm has a name, but the storm bows at a name. Hey, cardiac arrest, medically induced coma, body cooled, okay, to protect brain activity. He was released from the hospital on Thursday, walking out. No effects whatsoever. Emily asked the nurses, she said, "Is this normal?" And they were like, no, it's not. He's very, very lucky is what they said. However, we know the reason behind it. So all of that in the course of 4.5 days, he went from laying on a trail just about dead to walking out of a hospital, and he's flying home from Vancouver today. Amen's right. Sometimes it's good for us to hear the stories, and maybe this past week you had a week like that. Maybe your storm had a name, but this week you saw God do something incredible, and I hope so. Today we're going to continue in this series that we've been in, Summer at the Lake, and there's a lot of fun that can happen by the water during the summertime. Jesus, he likes to spend time at the water, and if you read through his life, you'll notice time and time again that Jesus does some incredible things by the water, and today is no different. Today we see Jesus do something incredible, something that shocks the disciples and us when we read it. However, this morning, at week 1, we talked about Jesus saying, "Hey, come follow me," by the side of the water. And last week, the disciples are freaking out in the middle of this storm, and he says, "Hey, have some faith," and he calms the wind and the waves. However, this week, Jesus raises the bar a little bit. Jesus raises the bar, and not only does he do something, he tells the disciples, "Listen, this is what I want you to do as well." He raises the stakes, if you will, and he calls their faith out just a little bit. And in doing so, he does the same for us. I want to pray this morning, and we're going to jump right in. Father, I'm so thankful. I'm thankful for your goodness. God, I'm thankful for the way that we see you step in the middle of the storms of our life. And God, you do absolutely miraculous things. Father, Chuck is just one story of that. And God, I pray that there is more around this room. Father, this morning I'm thankful for the dads that are in this room. I'm thankful that, God, you have called us and given us that responsibility. God, I'm thankful that you have given us that joy. God, I want to take a minute and pray for the dads in the room. God, I pray that you will equip and encourage. God, I pray that you will make them fearless and courageous. God, I pray that you will make them like you, that you will make us like you. That we will be dads that are willing to take risks for our faith. We will be dads that lead our kids closer to you. We will be dads that protect our wives. God, I pray that we will be dads that our kids can look at and get closer to you. God, we're thankful for this morning that we can all meet here. We can celebrate, we can laugh, we can encourage one another. God, we can be the church, and it's only because of Jesus. Because of Jesus, we're here. It's because of Jesus, we're able to learn. It's because of Jesus that we're able to worship. And so, God, I pray that during this time, that you will teach us, that you will show us who you are. You will remind us of your goodness. And you will remind us that we are people saved by grace. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. The past couple summers as a church, we've taken a mission trip up to Buffalo, New York, my hometown. And this summer we're not doing it, but last year we did something a little bit different than the previous year. We went on a prayer walk at the beginning of our trip. There is a couple that I've known for a whole bunch of years. They're serving as missionaries in an area of Buffalo where a bunch of refugees live. And there's a people group that they work with that they have moved right into the middle of their community, and they are there as missionaries. They're not... The community that's around them doesn't know that's why they're there. It's kind of you don't think of in the States, people being kind of on a secret mission. You think of that like, around the world, but it really is right here. And so they're there, that's their purpose, that's their goal. They're serving this people group, they're building relationships with this people group. They're just loving the people in their community. But I called this guy up and I said, hey, could there be something that we could partner together and do? And he said, yeah. He said, I'm sure there's stuff we can come up with. And so right out of the gate, we got there, we unpacked a little bit, we figured out where we were staying, all of that stuff, and then we went over to their house. And we sat in their living room, and we got to meet them, and we went for a prayer walk, and then we got back to the house and we shared a meal. And the meal was a traditional meal of the people group that they're in. And I'm not what you would call an adventurous eater, all right? I don't hear weird things and be like, oh, I want to try that, okay? I just kind of stay in the lane, enjoy it quite a bit, but I'm not an adventurer. So when I heard traditional meal of the people group that we were with, I'm like, I don't know about that. It turned out to be great. And I enjoyed it. But one of the things that happened on this prayer walk is as we walked through a city that I grew up in, as we walked through this city, my focus shifted just a little bit from something I was used to. As I walked through these streets, and I had driven down I didn't grow up in this area, but it was a part of Buffalo I'd driven through before, I was familiar with. And so, but this time walking through, we were handed a map. And on the map was different houses of people who lived in that neighborhood that my friends had built relationships with. And so as we walked by these houses, the challenge for us was to pray for them, pray for their families, and somehow that they would meet Jesus. And so we prayed as we walked by these houses. There was schools marked on this map, and we would pray for these schools as we walked by. There was different community centers on the map, and we would pray for these different community centers as we walked by, that through these relationships that happened in this place, that Jesus would be made known. We walked right down kind of the main street through this neighborhood, and there was a market. You wouldn't notice it, you wouldn't think that it was just by driving by, but it's like the epicenter of this community, okay? And we stood in front of it, and he said, this is where everything happens. This is where the elders of the community meet. This is where the people make decisions together. This is where it happens. And I'm like, really, this grocery store? And he's like, yeah. And the guy that I'm friends with, who's the missionary, he has built relationship to the point where he now is a part of almost their community council. Like, he has worked his way up, and it's been incredible to see. But anyways, he's standing talking to us. He's sharing with us these details. And I'm looking around, and I'm walking down this street, and I'm seeing what I have never seen before. As I walk through these streets of a place that I look back at and love, I recognize that everything is not right. Everything is not right. And one of the last places we stopped on this prayer walk was this community chalkboard. Okay? And I've got a picture of it. It looked like this. And at the top says, "The world we want." And there's a whole bunch of squares on it. And on these squares, they say things like this. Okay, you see the squares says, "I want to live in a world where race doesn't matter." Okay, racism. And these are just community people that come up and write these things on this board. Another one wrote, "I want to live in a world where there's no war and no need to be a refugee." Just honest kind of pouring out of their heart. And as I read through these squares, there was one that really grabbed my attention, and it read this: "I want to live in a world where my dad was still here." And I mean, we don't know who wrote that. But as soon as I read that, I thought, something's not right. Something's not right, that there's someone that has to, and it might have been illness, and it might have just been dad stepping out. We don't know. I don't know the story, but I know that it's not right. Something wasn't right. And the more that I walked and I read these things, my mind just continued to be challenged that there's something that's not right. And God continued to show me over and over and over again for the whole course of that trip, something is not right. There was a community of people not focused on what mattered, which was Jesus. We may not, or we may, walk around town. Things that we see every single day that have almost become routine. But when you begin to shift your focus and you notice looking around, things are not right. Because we have family and we have friends and we have moments in our life where we live not focused on what matters. You see, everything is not right. The disciples realize this where they meet Jesus this morning. If you brought a Bible, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. Jesus has had a long day. Okay, he's had a long day. He has just fed thousands of people with a little boy's brown bag lunch. Okay, and so he is worn out. And so he tells his disciples, says, "Listen, why don't you get in the boat and go on ahead? I got to go pray. I need to recalibrate. I need to get some rest. I need to focus on what matters." And so Jesus, he goes up on this mountainside and he spends some time in prayer. The disciples, they get in the boat and they head out on the lake. Matthew chapter 14, we're going to pick up in verse 22. It'll be on the screen or on your phone. It says this: "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid.' 'Lord, if it's you,' Peter replied, 'tell me to come out on the water.' 'Come,' he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. 'You have little faith,' he said. 'Why do you doubt?' And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.'" We're going to stop right there. Jesus is tired. He's refocusing on the mountainside. Disciples, they're out in a boat. There's obviously some wind. The waves are swirling. Once again, they find themselves in a boat in a storm. Okay. Familiar territory, maybe not quite as bad as last time, but they're nervous a little bit. But this time you hope, last week they went through the storm and Jesus made things right, so you would hope that this time, kind of learn from last time. I'm sure Jesus has this. However, last time Jesus was in the boat, this time he's not. And so all of a sudden now there's this doubt, wait a minute, maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he hasn't noticed that the wind's blowing and that the lake's kind of rough. And so they're out in the middle of the water. Wind's blowing, waves are crashing. Jesus is not there. They've had a long day. I'm sure they're a little bit tired. And all of a sudden they look up, and there is something and someone walking across the lake. This isn't right. Nobody walks on water, right? Like there's never a point in our lives right now where if we're out at Long Branch and we're swimming on the beach, or if we're putting our boat in, or if we live next to the water, or if we're walking across the dam, there's never a point in our lives where we're going to look out at the lake and see someone walking across and be like, oh, there you go, it's a nice day out. Right? Like that's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not right. And so the disciples, of course, they start freaking out. Say, it's a ghost. It's going to get us. They don't know what to do. They start crying out in fear. This is not right. And Jesus looks up at him and he says, take courage. Be courageous. It's me. Don't be afraid. Every time, all throughout the course of history, all throughout the Bible, when God asks someone to do something that's unimaginable based on conditions, he brings the word fear not into play. Noah's nervous about the people. Build a boat. It's not raining. Fear not. Abraham, fear the unknown of what's ahead. Isaac, and there's the Red Sea. Moses, and he has to go before Pharaoh. Joshua, looking ridiculous. Gideon with a depleted army. Jonah with a fear of the culture in front of him. Mary about carrying Jesus. The shepherds in the middle of a field. Fear not. Fear not. You see, when Jesus steps in, when Jesus calls his people to do the unimaginable, what seems completely uncomfortable, he prefaces it with, fear not, be courageous, I am here. Peter looks out at him and says, Jesus, if this is you, call me out on the water. And without batting an eye, Jesus says, all right, come on. Now, mind you, the wind is still blowing. The waves are still moving the boat. None of that has stopped. It's still happening all around them. And Peter stands up. Now, if you've ever been in a boat, not a big giant boat, this is a smaller boat. If you've ever been in a boat, you know that standing up in a boat of a smaller size is not the best idea, right? And on top of that, the wind's still blowing, the waves are still rocking the boat, and Peter stands up and puts his foot on the edge of the boat. Now, there's not one of us in the room that's going to say this makes sense, right? There's not one of us in a human context that's going to look at the water and say, you know what? Seems solid. Right? We're not going to. This is an unimaginable step in our human minds that Peter is getting ready to take. And he steps over the side of the boat and he steps onto the water where Jesus is still standing. And it holds him. And then he swings his other leg out over the side of the boat. Now he is there at the water. This is hard to fathom because we don't do it. It's not right. It doesn't seem right. It's not normal. And so here's Peter, and he's standing on the water, and he's looking at Jesus, and Jesus saying, come on, Peter. And he's standing on the water, and he takes another step, and he takes another step. He's literally walking on the water. And then what happens? It says that Peter begins to look around him. You see, what happened is Peter's focus shifted. When he realized everything was not right, he looked at what was beyond instead of what was right at the center. And when Peter looks at all of the conditions of what's beyond, he begins to fall. And what was just an extreme amount of faith The faith that it takes to step out of a boat and onto the water that normally you sink in, that you swim in, and now Peter's walking on top. The amount of faith that it took Peter to take that step, all of a sudden, as soon as he notices the conditions of what's beyond and that everything is not right around him, immediately that faith dissipates and it's gone. And probably you and I, we've been there a time or two, haven't we? Faith is strong when we're together. Sunday mornings, we're here, we're worshiping, we're excited. It's good to be together. We're excited to learn together. You know, it's easy to have faith here, and then all of a sudden Wednesday hits. And the faith that was so strong in this room, all of a sudden on Wednesday, you're looking at all of the conditions that are beyond, and you've forgotten about who's at the center. And when we begin to look at those, we begin to sink. All of a sudden, the conditions of everything that's not right around us reminds us that sometimes the faith falls apart. Faith falls apart when we're focused on all of the beyond. And that's exactly what happens to Peter. And Peter begins to fall down into the water and he shouts out, "Lord, save me!" And if we were to compare the amount of times in our life, if we're real honest, if we were to compare the amount of times in our life when we have stepped out on water on this extreme amount of faith, done the unimaginable because God wants us to do it, everyone else thinks that we're crazy, and the amount of times that we feel like we're drowning and we're just grasping at a hand saying, "Lord, save me," probably more of us can relate to these moments than these, can't we? And so we can understand as Peter begins to sink, "Lord, save me." And it doesn't say Jesus looked at Peter and said, "Well, you can flail a little bit, then I'll get you." It doesn't say, "You should have just looked at me, Peter. Enjoy your swim." It says that he reached down and he grabbed him. He said he reached down and grabbed his hand, and now he did have kind of this literal come to Jesus moment. He says, "Why still so little faith? Why do you doubt?" You see, the rock solid faith that Peter held onto all of a sudden dissipates. He's sinking. Jesus grabs him up and he says, "I'm still here." When Peter looked at what was beyond, instead of at the center, he began to fall. Friends, our truth for this morning is this: Jesus is the focus of our foundation. And our foundation will crumble and fall when we begin to look at everything that's beyond instead of who is at the center. Our foundation, it will crack and it will fall apart, and we'll look at everything that's going on in the world around us. We'll say, "I don't know how I can do this. I don't know how this is going to happen. These conditions are unimaginable. I'm not sure how I can handle this." And it will always fall apart. But when our focus is Jesus, our foundation is firm. And we can always walk, even when everything is not right, with a foundation built on Jesus. 1 John chapter 1, verse 7 says this: "But if we walk in the light, as he is the light, we have a fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, the Son, purifies us from all sin." If we walk focused on him, he makes this foundation strong. Now, what we can't miss is that even as Peter is walking on the water, the storm is still happening. Like the wind is still blowing, the waves are still crashing, and it's not until they're back in the boat that all of a sudden that stops. But the foundation was strong as long as Peter was focused. For you and for me, where right now is God asking you to step into the uncomfortable and trust him? Where right now in life is God asking you to step into the uncomfortable and trust that he will build a firm foundation? Where is the uncomfortable in our lives that Jesus is asking us to trust him in the middle of? What does that step look like for you? You see, Jesus is the focus of our foundation. And when we focus on him, our foundation is strong, no matter what is going on around us. Movie that was popular in our house for a while, a couple movies actually. It's a movie, Monsters, Inc. and Monsters University. Yeah. Oh, there we go. All right, we're enjoying these. Okay, I enjoyed them for a long time. I'm thankful for the break, but we love these movies in our house. If you've never seen Monsters, Inc. or Monsters University, the premise of these movies is there are these monsters that are training. Okay, in Monsters University, they're training to be the best scarers. Monsters, Inc., okay, it is the story of these monsters, and it's a cartoon kids movie, okay? They're in and out of these closets, okay, scaring kids. That's the whole premise of the movie. There's some more story, okay? You can go and watch them, but the whole premise of the movie is them learning to be the best scarers and then being the best scarers that they can be and keeping track of the amount of scares that they get. Okay? And so we would watch these movies all the time. All the time. We would watch these movies, especially Monsters University. And Monsters University is the training ground. Okay? It's them learning to be the best scarers. And in both of these movies, there's a couple different times when the monsters sneak in and the child recognizes that there is something that's not right in the room. It recognizes that there's something that's a little bit off in the room, and so they wake up. Before the monster scares, they wake up. And when they wake up, what do? They call for their dad. I don't have kids that so far have kind of been afraid of the monsters in the closet. Okay, I don't have that so far, but so far they've not been afraid of that. Some of us have. Okay, we've got the kid that's terrified of what's in the closet. Okay, we maybe have the grandkid that's terrified of that. Maybe you were the kid that's terrified of the monsters under your bed or the monsters in the closet. In the movie, every time that there is a sense of danger, they call out for their parents, and the dad comes running in the room. He says, "What's the matter?" He says, "Something's not right. There's a monster in here." And the dad would look in the closet, and the dad would look under the bed, and there most of the time was not one. I remember as a kid growing up, I was younger. Hey, and we had a nightlight in our room, and there was some sort of shadow hitting something. I still can't tell you to this day what it is. And I was convinced that there was a snake on top of one of the pictures in my room. I was convinced of it. It was there. And so for like a week in a row, okay, every night, I would lay in bed and I would look, and I would see this snake on top. This is just being honest, okay? Snake on top of the picture. There was no snake. There wasn't. But I would see this snake, and every time I would call out for my dad, and he would come in, and he'd say, "What's the matter?" I'd say, "There's a snake on top of that picture." There's no snake on top of that picture, all right? "No, it's there. I know it's there." "Matthew, there's nothing there." And so he'd flip the light on, and when he'd flip the light on, it would be gone. "Well, I'm sure it was there." "There's no snake there." And he shut the light back off. And then I would see it. That was my monster. It wasn't there. I thought it was. But my dad would always fix it because there wasn't anything there. He was always the one that I would call out to, and he would fix it. Friends, this morning, I would imagine that there are a lot of us that we've got monsters. We've got monsters in our closet. We've got monsters living under our bed. We've got monsters in our finances. We've got monsters in our marriages. We've got monsters, and we sense this fear, and it's sweeping up in us, and these monsters seem to be overtaking just a little bit. There's monsters at work. There's monsters in parenting, not your kids, but I imagine that there's some of us that we just live in this fear because we're so focused on the monsters in the beyond, and we've forgotten to focus on Jesus in the middle. Because every time as a kid I called my dad, he came in and he said, everything's okay. You watch these movies and the scenes when the dad comes in, the monsters don't come out. Friends, this morning, I imagine there's some of us that we have taken our eyes off Jesus. Not because we're desiring to do wrong, and not because we're desiring to sin. Maybe some of us are, if we're honest, but we've just kind of gotten caught up in life. We've gotten caught up in the fears of life. We've gotten caught up in the things in this world and in our life that just don't seem right. And we've started to look at the beyond. We've started to look at the waves that are crashing and the wind that's blowing in our lives. And we notice all of these things and we say, it's not right. It's not fair. It's not easy. But we've forgotten to focus on Jesus. And all the while, as we're looking at the beyond and we're looking at the monsters in all of the arenas of our life, and we feel like we're sinking. We feel like we're falling under. And maybe this morning, if that's where you feel like you're at, it's time for us to cry out to our Father in heaven. Just like Peter, Lord, save me. And immediately he grabs him. Immediately. There's some of us that we understand where Peter's at. We've lost our focus. And maybe this morning, our foundation is getting shaky because of it. When our focus is Jesus, our foundation is strong. When our focus is Jesus, the monsters don't crumble the foundation. What's beyond can seem a little bit scary, but the foundation doesn't shake when it's focused on Jesus. This morning, have we lost our focus? Is God calling us to do what seems unimaginable? This morning, have we gotten distracted by the beyond, the conditions that are around us? And we've forgotten to focus on who's at the center. No matter where we're at, this morning our foundation is stronger when we focus on Jesus. Let's go ahead and stand together. We're going to sing words of the song, kind of just remind us that no matter what the beyond looks like, God, you've got this. The wind and the waves, they're going to crash, but God, you've got this. And as long as I focus on you, I've got this. As long as I focus on you, my foundation is strong. And the wind might blow and the waves may crash, but my foundation is strong. And I can do the unimaginable in this world if my focus is on you. Maybe as we worship, we've become distracted. Maybe as we worship this morning, we resonate with Peter who's sinking. Maybe this morning we resonate with the disciples who are too afraid to get out of the boat. And so they're just observing other people do things. Maybe for some of us, the conditions are big and the storm is big. Maybe for some of us, the fear of the monsters in this life seem to be overtaking us. This morning as we worship, I want to challenge us that no matter where we're at on this spectrum, that we hold on to the words in the book of Hebrews where it says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. Let us focus on him and recognize that if we are focused on him, our foundation is strong. And because of that, no matter what the conditions and the wind looks like, we are able to say that it is well.